So now that Trump won, I think it's time for the right to take back the narrative on some things. And one of those things is the trans debate. Now, I notice a place where people on the right who argue this issue are lacking. Most of the arguments that I see from the right center around either a feeling of knee-jerk disgust reaction that a lot of people have when they see someone obviously not passing but trying to pass. I think it would be dishonest to say that disgust reaction is not there in a majority of people. And the other thing I see most right-wing arguments center around is the sentiment of wanting to protect women in the locker room, women's sports, the fairness of sports competitions, fear of predators posing as trans people, entering women's spaces and taking advantage of that. Now, these arguments are well and good. They convince a lot of moderates, but they have a ceiling for the number of people we can convince with them. And I think we're close to that ceiling now, so I think it's time to reshuffle the way the right wing approaches the issue. There's not going to be a civil war. There's not going to be a mass genocide of people from the other political faction. These people are going to be sharing a country and a civic system with us, till death do us part. So we need to either live with them or try to convince at least some of them. Convincing people on a topic like this one is a tall order, but let me take a crack at it. Let's start by reducing the issue to a topic where the right and the left actually do agree. The disagreement between left and right is pretty fundamental, but there is a place deep down where I think we do have a little bit of common ground. That is the term gender dysphoria. Here's what the DSM-5 says about it. This is the book that psychologists use to classify and diagnose mental illnesses. DSM-5 says it is a clinically significant distress or impairment related to gender incongruence, which may include desire to change primary and/or secondary sex characteristics. So in other words, in layman's terms, it's the feeling someone gets when they look in the mirror and they feel ill at ease with either the manly or the womanly parts of their natural body. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that the right and the left will probably agree this is a bad thing, and they will probably agree it's a noble goal to reduce the negative emotions associated with this. And outright curing it would be the best thing possible. And here's where the right and left differ. The left proposes, as a cure for this, or at least a treatment, allowing the afflicted person to get surgery, speech therapies, change their wardrobe, change their name, change up every part of their lifestyle in order to match the gender that they would like to associate with. People on the right would say that this causes a whole lot of harm to both the trans person themselves and to the people around them, often in ways that are not immediately obvious. The left, on the other hand, denies all those claims of the harm that's caused, and they actually claim the libertarian position here of allowing people to do what they want with their own bodies, even if what they want to do harms themselves, such as a surgery that would eliminate any possibility of having children, and a lifestyle which causes a shockingly high rate of suicide. Furthermore, people on the left would say that anyone who denies the trans person their right to live as they like, they would say the people who deny it are the ones causing that mental torment to the trans person. They blame any and all ostracism or negative social consequences on the right-wing bigots, so-called, despite the fact that the majority of people do have that knee-jerk disgust reaction and they cannot control that knee-jerk disgust reaction. But what if we propose an alternative treatment for gender dysphoria? Now, at this point in the video, I will start reading off an essay that I wrote a couple years ago on this topic. It's gonna be scripted, it's gonna sound robotic, here we go. Ahem. There exists an especially hot debate in the country today over the ethics of a medical gender transition as treatment for feelings of gender dysphoria. There are people who, without irony, advocate beginning the process in trans-identifying children before they reach puberty. They give reasons including an emotional appeal to the experience of going through the puberty of a body that does not feel like their own. On the other side, fears have been stoked about sexual assaults, sometimes pedophilic in nature, from people who fetishize living out an exaggerated caricature of the stereotypical lifestyle of the opposite gender, as the issue involves the question of whether medically transitioned, and often also pre-transitioned individuals, should be allowed to share a locker room changing room with children of the opposite biological sex. There seems to be little middle ground. Those on the left would call the denial of gender-affirming bathroom policy a breach of human rights, while those on the right see it as a breach of privacy and an attack on the innocence of children. First, I will share my own thoughts on what I think the ideal solution should be, then I will share some other points of a more practical here-and-now nature. The root problem, as seen near universally on the left and even by many on the right, is the feeling of gender dysphoria. The causes of the dysphoria are sometimes debated at length, but I won't get into that here. If the dysphoria is the problem, how can we solve it? The near universally accepted answer on the left is gender-affirming care. That is, medical and psychological psychological treatment which takes the patient's claim of being the opposite gender at face value and attempts to treat the problems professed by the patient. It's not hard to see, though, that this method has several flaws. I give the following not to demonize the people who seek gender-affirming care, but to illustrate the challenges in undergoing the process and to highlight the reasons I believe alternatives should be sought out and culturally accepted. Point 1. The financial cost. Hormone treatment, speech therapy, psychological care, and surgical operations can easily cost multiple tens of thousands of dollars. It is not unthinkable for a single patient to have to pay, either directly or through insurance, 7 figures or more in medical cost, especially now with Joe Biden inflation. While this is good for the medical providers, it's not practical for the average patient. Insurance providers can also provide numerous challenges in this regard. The cost and elective nature of these surgeries can make medical insurance quite a headache to navigate. Second, the lifestyle cost. The patient will need to get a whole new wardrobe, cosmetic products to be used for altering appearance to match gender identity, a new name, and all the legal and social hassle associated with it, new hygienic habits, etc. Nearly every part of their daily life will be affected. I am skeptical of claims that cumulative time and effort spent on these things does not take an emotional toll. Third, the high rate of surgical complications. There are a wealth of graphic horror stories if one were to look for them. One particular example that comes to mind is an individual who was interviewed by Matt Walsh describing a hair growing inside their, female to male, urethra, and the challenges of finding a doctor who was even willing to do something about it. The person described intense pain on a daily basis and feelings of hopelessness caused by all the refusals of medical treatment. The high rate of complication is, unfortunately, often not properly disclosed to patients of gender-affirming care. That much shouldn't be surprising, as medical providers have a vested interest in the patient's continued willingness to undergo treatment. Point 4. The reality that surgery and hormone treatment will not necessarily be the cure-all to gender dysphoria. There will always be people who call the process an abomination, and who refuse to address trans people by the gender and the name they desire. Likewise, there will always be private doubts held within the individual. As long as that is the case, gender-affirming care will not be a complete solution to gender dysphoria. Fifth, and perhaps most significant, the suicide rate. The number 41%, meaning the percentage of trans-identifying individuals who have attempted suicide, is the number I see most often thrown around in online discussions, though I have seen hearsay that a more recent update has raised the number above 50%. Many on the left would attribute the number solely to bigotry and bullying, but I think reality is less simple than that. Even granted the point about bullying, though, I would file it under my second and fourth points just above. It is something which gender-affirming care fails to address. As a treatment for emotional distress, gender-affirming care certainly seems to be doing a bad job. Taking into account the number and scale of flaws and risks associated with gender-affirming care, one might not be thought unreasonable if they were to suggest alternate means of treatment. Unfortunately, other treatments are not nearly as popular as gender-affirming care, and though gender-affirming care cannot be said to eliminate dysphoria, alternate treatments cannot be said to have had wide success in a significant number of patients. What alternative treatments have I seen pursued by people who, in some official capacity, attempt to care for a patient of gender dysphoria? The list is quite small. First, I've seen shock therapy. Many on the left would paint it as a barbaric practice forced upon people, but I have personally talked to at least one who would be eager to try that, or anything else as a cure for his dysphoria, if only there was a chance for him to do so. Those treated with electrotherapy are certainly not forced into it, but I do have serious doubts as to the effectiveness. Second, I've seen people suggest Christianity or some other religion as a tool to combat those negative emotions. While God is very powerful, whether viewed as a spiritual and divine force or as a psychological placebo, and I can attest from personal experience how effective God can be, not everyone is at a place in their lives where they're ready to begin a spiritual journey. Many may never be. That sort of mental transformation is something that should never be forced, and attempts to force it will be met with resentment rather than sympathy for the religion in question. While I will help any who want to willingly begin that journey, feel free to reach out if you want to talk to me about that, it is far from a universal treatment. Those aside, what treatments could very well work? As a layperson, I'm able to think of a few. First, physical exercise, and often passion for a project, is a natural and healthy way to fill the brain with chemicals that produce positive emotions. Copious studies have been done on the psychology of physical exercise. When done on a regular basis, it can indeed cure or greatly reduce feelings of depression, anxiety, and other negative emotions. It has the added effect of improving the body and its general health. A passion project hobby has the added effect of sharpening the mind, opening social and professional opportunities, and adding charm to one's personality. It is less time-consuming than regular therapy, hormone treatment, medical visits, lifestyle changes, etc. It is less expensive than all of the above, and added surgeries and wardrobe changes. Additionally, while a gender-affirming lifestyle will earn a person intense criticism from people who associate that with sexual deviancy, beginning exercise or learning a new hobby or skill will often earn you new friends. Even if dysphoria persists and gender-affirming care is later sought, I think it is a rare person who would not feel that physical exercise has improved their life in some way. Next, sex-affirming hormone treatment is a term I am dubbing now. I will use that term to mean treatment of a patient of dysphoria using hormones consistent with their biological sex. These hormones do have a very real psychological effect, whether gender-affirming or sex-affirming. While a medical professional would be able to give a more detailed explanation of this, I can confidently say sex-affirming hormone treatment is less experimental than gender-affirming. Very many middle-aged people are already given these types of hormones for low T, issues with the female reproductive system, and other conditions. I believe finding a good balance for sex-affirming hormones would be much easier than finding such a balance for gender-affirming hormones. I believe patients on average will experience much less stress and discomfort using sex-affirming rather than gender-affirming hormone treatments, because their bodies are used to and expect hormones that align with biological sex, and hormones for the opposite sex will be pushing against the psychological grain. While my list of possible solutions only includes 2 bullet points, I am hopeful that further study by professionals will reveal more possibilities. The problem I see is the focus on gender-affirming care and the knee-jerk political reaction to criticism of it. This social hype makes people blind to the need for other treatment options. Another problem I see is the lack of financial incentive for medical providers to advocate such care. They get money when they perform procedures. It is in their financial interest to keep patients coming back for a larger number of more complicated procedures, such as the process involved in a gender-affirming medical transition. There's more to what I wrote, but I'll stop reading it there. The point that I think we should try to extract from this, the point that I think we should start bringing into debates with the left, and entering into the public discourse more, is the way that the medical industry takes advantage of these people. The left has the stereotype that we're just hateful Nazi bigots. At best, we want to control other people's bodies. At worst, we want actual genocide. That is what the most extreme left actually does think of us. So I think we need to counter that by showing some compassion to the trans people themselves, who we cast off as misguided victims of the medical industry, and using some of the left's rhetoric against them, victims of these billion-dollar pharmaceutical and medical corporations. We should try to cast ourselves as wanting to help people who have dysphoria, wanting to help them get better and improve their lives. Because after all, I do want to help them get better. I would rather see them happy, productive, not wasting hours and hours and hours of time just trying to pass. I would rather see them living happily with a smile on their face as the gender assigned at birth. I think most people on the right would. And the part about having a smile on the face is the part that I think we should emphasize.